It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the fourth session, which I'm sure is going to be truly exciting. Fourth session is on USA and India in the Indo-Pacific. USA and India in the Indo-Pacific. Economy, maritime race, and maritime development. We have four people on the panel for the session. The session was chaired by Mr. Sharon Kuchi. She is a research associate with the Center for Public Policy Research. She completed her master's in international relations and political science in the Central University of Kerala and MPhil in political science in the University of Hyderabad. Her expertise is explores themes of state and feminist negotiations in post-Arab Spring Egypt. Sharon has secured UGC Junior Research Fellowship during her research period in Hyderabad. Welcome. You have Mr. William G. Singh. He is a senior advisor to the Asia program at the United States Institute of Peace. He is also a senior advisor for aerospace and defense to the U.S. India Strategic Partnership Forum. Sitting with U.S. Security Assistance Secretary, defense to South and Southeast Asia. The rounded of negotiations with even U.S. defense cooperation in the region, including the new access agreement with Australia, Philippines, and Singapore. He started the U.S. India Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. Welcome. The next speaker is Vice Admiral Peter. He retired in February 2013 as the 19th Director General of the Indian Coast Guard. A specialist in navigation and direction, he has held several key operations and staff appointments, including command of the three warships in a career of close to 4 decades in the Indian Navy. As flag officer, he commanded Maharashtra and Gujarat Naval Yard. He was the first commandant of the Indian Naval Academy and chief of personnel in the Navy. Welcome. A fourth panelist is Dr. Umar Muhammad. He teaches international relations at the Central University of Kerala. He was earlier associated with the Observer Research Foundation, ORF, and the United Service Institution of India. He is an alumnus of JNU. Areas of interest include great power politics, Russian foreign policy, soft power, Middle East politics, and U.S. domestic and foreign policy. He serves as a peer reviewer to many international and national journals. Welcome. Now I hand over the session to the chair, Mr. Sharon Kuchi.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last and final session of the two-day conference. Over the course of 2 days and 4 sessions, we have been discussing a range of sectors of engagement in the Indo-U.S. relations. Today, in the final session, we'll be getting into the Indo-Pacific, most happening and the most interesting area, perhaps, and one of the prime sectors of engagement in Indo-U.S. relations. In the 21st century, Indo-Pacific is an important field of geoeconomics, geopolitics, and maritime security. A free, inclusive, open, and rules-based hybrid is increasingly featuring in India's and U.S. strategy, bilaterally and multilaterally. We have here with us 3 distinguished speakers who will be deliberating at length about the history of U.S.
least noise making, so hopefully everyone can hear me. You all hear me? Okay. I am not presenting a paper. I'm going to talk based on some of the discussions we've been having over the last 2 days. So if you look at my distinguished co-panelists, they are experts in the security aspects, and I've been stimulated listening to our sessions to think a little bit about why our U.S. and India ties are transitioning at a moment, a great moment of global flux that everyone's talking about, and I decided I'd like to grasp those dynamics and zoom into the Quad, Indo-Pacific, and the Quad. And touch on the critical technology issues, and we can get to more of that during Q&A. So thank you to the organizers, thank you to CCPR, I know your whole team have been really amazing. This is like a return to real life for many people here. I don't know how many people, it might be the first in-person conference they've done in 2 years. So certainly the first time I went back to India, like in 2020. So I'm really happy. Ambassador Srinivasan yesterday talked about, if you think of the theme here, change, continuity, and transformation, going from estranged to engage and toward embracing partners. And I think that's a really useful frame because we're somewhere between engage and embrace. It's not quite an embrace. Over many years working on U.S.-India relations at the Department of Defense and the Department of State in the U.S., I used to sometimes remind my American colleagues that we might be called the ardent suitor when it comes to the U.S.-India relation. We are pursuing India. We really want to be not just partners. The United States would love to be allies with India, recognizes that that's not something India wants. And so the nature of the relationship is defined by a transition, a period of getting over what Prime Minister Modi called the hesitations of history, and an embrace of what does seem like a really natural. But yesterday in our discussion, because Russia and Ukraine is dominating thinking and the trend of geopolitics right now, we talked a lot about divergence. And as I was thinking about that more yesterday, I actually wanted to counter the notion of strategic divergence. I think the strategic the strategic convergence of the United States and India is almost so significant, it almost can't be overstated. And here's what I mean. Try to think of an issue where we don't actually want almost the same or very closely aligned. So in Russia and Ukraine, we would clearly like that war to end, both sides. The Indians have not been as critical as Russia, but it's for different reasons. It's how we approach problems, not what we want. With Iran, India also does not want Iran to be a nuclear power. With Afghanistan, India and the United States did not want the Taliban to come back to power. They wanted a democratic, pluralistic government to take root in Afghanistan. In Myanmar, India and the United States both want a democratic government, not wish to see the military junta be a long-term dictatorial regime there. With regards to China, the South China Sea, and a whole host of other issues, the agreement is even more obvious. But even on the issue where we disagree, Myanmar, India stays engaged with the junta because it has its own reasons, has its own border conflict to worry about, it has its own dynamic. With Iran, similarly, want the same outcome but have different approaches. The reason we have these different approaches is a function not of differing interests. Those are surprisingly aligned. It's a function of differing positions of global power in the world, different geopolitical realities, and different economic development that we all have. But I actually think even on the issues we seem to be having fights about, it's fair to say that the underlying outcome we see is almost always the same. That Sri Lanka is the same, Nepal is the same, the right to reach Pakistan, terrorism, on cybersecurity, the interests align in almost overwhelming way. And I think that's one of the reasons you see that despite differences, the dramas that pop up in any relationship no longer put us into the deep freeze. We don't see things derailing the relationship like even a decade ago when some kind of incident would happen. You might really not have a lot of engagement for a few months. You might have a really difficult period. Now what happens is differences get put into to a channel for dealing with that, and everyone tries to move forward on all of the other issues. That's how I saw 2+2 play out just a couple of weeks ago. I had the opportunity to speak to External Affairs Minister Dyshankar after that meeting while he was in Washington. I don't think he would mind sharing. He said, from the press coverage and my real life, I think must have been two different meetings happening entirely. So the difference is really. So our alignment of interests is fairly global, but it's the strongest in the Indo-Pacific. And I think it's the strongest in the Indo-Pacific for basically 2 negative, 4 or 5 positive. So the 2 negative reasons are China and Mother Nature. So and Mother Nature, I would include not just the effects of climate change, disruptive, severe weather, and all that, but also and then from China, we actually have a very similar conception of the China threat. We wish to see China be what was long ago called a responsible stakeholder. But over the last 20 years, year by year by year, we both have grown to think that's less likely. The alternative of a indigenous China that uses growing economic, military, and political power to change the nature of the region in ways that are bad for our interests. We think that's more likely than the responsible stakeholder we have been betting on for so long. For India, of course, that came home with the Iran clashes and sort of a recognition that the Chinese were willing to play with a level of aggressiveness when it comes to underlying bilateral disputes that for 30 or 40 years, India felt was not likely. And think that the Chinese build up a permanent forward deployed military basing strategy, reinforcing in the rear with the air assets and all the other things to take to be able to be ready to wage war today. So previously, the Chinese were not ready to wage war on the line of actual control tonight. Now they are, and India has felt that it needs to match that, and India has also deployed substantial capabilities and forces to the line of actual control. It also then started taking a view that was more aligned with the direction of the United States, especially during the Trump era, of really taking a harder line, even to China when it comes to the worries about China, the worries about climate change, and the sort of resilience to keep the economic engine of the Indo-Pacific going, really drives the global economy. Those are trade, investment, education, the positive. Trade, investment, education, environment in terms of permanent cooperation, and innovation. So these 2 negatives are actually beating us to try to find ways to collaborate in all of these positive areas. And I think that when you look at what those threats that we're driving, those are all to try to find ways to cooperate in areas that integrate power, integrate sort of our sort of globalization variations of world. So we want more trade, we want to collaborate for innovation, we want to partner on dealing with environmental challenges. And at the same time, the geopolitical moment, a lot of what we were talking about yesterday, push towards fragmentation, renewed sense of concern that globalization, integration exposes you as a country to too much risk. We need to secure our supply chain. We need to secure our sources of trade. We need to secure our network and be careful how we share data with other countries, how we make sure we protect the data of our own companies, our own citizens, our own government. Those all drive towards fragmentation. And that's the tension you see policy initiatives trying to wrestle between the U.S. and India. And I would say, rather surprisingly, the main vehicle for that in the Pacific for our 2 countries has become the Quad. So my experience with the Quad goes all the way back to 2004 tsunami. When I helped relief efforts, the Quad came to be as an ad hoc mechanism for the United States, India, Japan, and Australia to cooperate on the through the doldrums, I would call it, of the early sort of 2010, 2015 period when the Quad was kind of still going, but we were meeting at an assistant secretary, joint secretary level, working groups. So there was no real energy. So this dramatic transformation, I believe, not coincidentally, followed the Gulf clashes, in which India basically led from rejuvenation law, a mechanism that it saw as what I think is a non-security security tool. So what Quad and the three other countries, Japan, Australia, and the United States, essentially followed India's lead. The Quad has turned into a way to compete with rather than have conflict with China. The idea that at the leader level, prime minister and president have all seemed to buy into that by cooperating, we have the ability to get at least on par with China in the area of affirmative engagement. Those areas of affirmative engagement need things like infrastructure, health, green economy, blue economy, clean ports, as we were hearing from Couple earlier, those sorts of areas of investment, education. Nowhere in the Quad press releases we see the word China. Nowhere in the Quad press releases we see maritime security in particular. I will give reference to it in one, but it is focused on affirmative cooperation. Why is that? I think that's mainly because the biggest investor in this region has been China. And to the degree that the democracy of the region have been investing, it has been uncoordinated and certainly not strategic in the way in which the Chinese investment. And so there's a desire to compete with China, but to basically not fall into the trap of saying everything is about constraining funding or doing things that will lead to a higher investment conflict. The Quad, therefore, carry a lot of weight. In fact, really odd to see in some ways an ad hoc multilateral mechanism having this much of a focus of the bilateral relationship resting on. Look at how when the Quad meets, you have these leaders level engagement, the bilateral summits on the margins of the Quad. A lot is riding on the Quad. It started with just three focus areas. They were critical emerging technology, climate, and health. I think it has almost 15 areas that are sort of focus areas for the Quad mechanism. 15 is too much to really get traction in everything, so it'll be interesting to see where the countries decide to deal with it. And I think those first three are certain. We'll focus on not just the pandemic response, which has already started to deliver in partnership with India and Japan doing climate, they've already started to deliver 1 billion vaccine doses. They'll try to build that in other areas of global health as well. I think it has a lot of potential to really make a difference, including in sub-Saharan Africa, endemic diseases, there's a lot of areas, including on affordable pharmaceuticals, India's capacity. There's a host of things. On climate and energy, is one of the most robust areas of cooperation. In partnership, other bilateral initiatives, and green ports efforts under Quad, I think they're likely to really get attention. And then in critical technology, the focus area is biotechnology, which India is leading. The future of secure networking from 5G onward, where we go, that sort of stuff, critical supply chain security, which Australia is leading, and then the future of global standards. And the standard issue is actually, I think, one of the most important, least sexy, and most difficult in the future of our cooperation. So China is playing very aggressive world, making sure it's on all the UN bodies, making sure it's offering proposals, making sure it's suggesting reforms, and the reforms it's suggesting all will lead countries towards having kind of a Chinese, the ability to have kind of a Chinese surveillance state. So, this is the Chinese model. It's very, it's alive and well, and it's being pushed through both levels. On our side, we don't, for the most part, have our own sets of standards for how we're going to govern things like, and we don't, for the most part, agree when we do or when we're developing data localization. Right now, it would not be possible for all the Quad countries to join the digital economy partnership agreement that Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile have, because we can't agree on a lot of things that are in that kind of package. How we coordinate on those issues, the future of standards, the future of how we're going to conduct ourselves in the world, and whether we find ways to accommodate one each other's concerns, will probably determine how high the potential will be for our cooperation in a lot of these critical technology areas. Because if it becomes too divisive, if it becomes too protectionist, if it's impossible to ensure the security of your data in your partner's domestic territory, it's going to stifle innovation. Behind all this is the question of security. I actually think it's really wise of these four countries to try to invest in non-hard security aspects. If you look at U.S.-India cooperation, defense, my core area of focus, has really been the backbone on which a lot of other things are built. When other things weren't going well, we've been for 20 years, maritime security in particular. I don't know what fair amount about this. It's been really robust and growing. But mil-to-mil cooperation, security concerns about China will be insufficient for people. So that's the foundation we might build on. But we're going to be much more important, ultimately decisive in cooperating all of these. I'll leave it there.
Then move on to Dr. Then move on to Vice Chancellor.
Good afternoon. I would say let me thank CPTR as well as the U.S. Consul General Chennai for organizing this and giving me an opportunity to be part of it. Now I will give you my practitioner viewpoint on Indo-Pacific. But I must also tell you that I know that's the last session and it's past 12 o'clock. So there must be a lot of, so difficult to keep. So I reminded me of a story again involving India and U.S. This happened at the U.S. Naval Academy many years ago, I think almost 30, 35 years ago. There is a very famous motivational speaker. He was actually an evangelist preacher and speak regularly to the naval officers there. And outstanding speaker, but he had really a problem was that he just couldn't remember names. So he found a way that in the lapel pin of his jacket, he used to write the names. So he used to start his speech by saying that Admiral Commandant of the U.S. Naval Academy, Admiral Stanford Turner, then go on like that. And at the end of the speech, he used to say, now I would like to thank the Almighty Jesus Christ. So I have my little scriptures here to get the thing going. Now you'll agree that the 21st century is often spoken of as the century of the seas. And actually, Admiral Albert K. Mahan, who was a US naval thinker and historian of the 19th century, had actually in his book he had said that whoever controls the Indian Ocean controls Asia. This ocean is the key to the seven seas. And in the 21st century, destiny of the world will be decided on its waters. However, towards the end of the 20th century, it became apparent that the Indian Ocean cannot be looked at in isolation. The emergence of a multipolar world at the end of the Cold War and the expanding globalization of trade and commerce coupled with the growth of the Asian economies, now which in turn resulted there asking for tremendous energy and mineral resources which had to come from the Gulf and the African nations, and then the transportation of finished products from their countries to Asia, rest of Asia, Africa, Europe, all this resulted in increasing shipping between both oceans. Thus, in the early part of the century, or rather toward the end of the 20th century, they started calling it as the Indo-Pacific. Now, some analysts also have the opinion that increasing dominance, including flexing of its military muscle and capabilities by China, and its string of pearl strategy raised alarms virtually across the world, not only among the liberals. And so, any nation which had interest in the economic security of this area started focused on it, and then the Indo-Pacific started becoming one geo-economic and security zone. Now, virtually, it was Prime Minister Shinzo Abe who actually spoke with the confluence of the two seas in his address to the Indian Parliament in August 2007. The concept possibly got its first recognition officially when Australia brought out a defense white paper in 2013 indicating Indo-Pacific as a new theater. 2 years later, India and Japan, after bilateral meeting between their prime ministers, actually issued a joint statement on India-Japan vision for 2025, when they talked of a special strategic and global partnership working together for the peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region and the world as such. Now, the US indicated its importance for the Indo-Pacific as a new theater for national security by renaming the US Pacific Command as the Indo-Pacific Command in 2018. And in 2019, both the ASEAN as well as France brought out documents indicating their vision for the Indo-Pacific. Now, if you look back at history, India with a strategic location on the Indian Ocean was a very flourishing economic and cultural center from the dawn of civilization. So the area of Indo-Pacific was not unknown to India, as we had trade and cultural links with Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and two Buddhist links to Japan. And just as India announced its good peace policy in the last decade of the 20th century to enhance or reinforce our linkages in this area, the concept of Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific took off. Now you can see India's location at the top of Indian Ocean, close to all the choke points. That means wherever the trade is coming from, it virtually can be controlled in India. So it's a very strategic location. So it gives India an added stake in the security and stability of waters of the Indo-Pacific region. More so, as we are located very close to the largest source of oil and natural gas in the world, that's the Gulf region, as well as Central Asia. So for India, it actually means a strategic stretch. We just look from the east coast of India, goes to ASEAN, China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and the eastern stretches of Russia. Indeed, a very major arena of economic and geostrategic significance. Now, if you look at it as a maritime practitioner, you will see that Indo-Pacific is a multicultural, multipolar region accounting for nearly 60% of the world's GDP, 65% of its population. It's also a major repository of marine resources, both living and non-living. Now, trade and commerce to the region, including energy flows, is close to 60% of the global maritime trade. Now, in India, while our trade to the sea is almost 90% by volume and over 70% the value, it's about $750 billion worth of trade that we go to the sea. 55% of it, worth about 5 trillion, is through the South China Sea, and our share of trade with the ASEAN nations alone is close to 12%, a little over 11.5%. Now, our outlook towards Indo-Pacific was very well amplified by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018, when he said that, and I quote, "Oceans are an important place in Indian thinking since pre-Vedic times. Indian Ocean has shaped much of our history and key to our future. It's also the lifeline of global commerce." He went on to say that Indo-Pacific is a natural region. It's also home to a vast array of global opportunities and challenges. I'm increasingly convinced that each passing day, destinies of those of us who live in the region are linked. We should all have equal access and the right under international law to the use of common space on sea, in the air, and that would require freedom of navigation, unimpeded commerce, and peaceful settlements of disputes in accordance with international law. When we all agree to live by the code, our sea lanes will be pathways to prosperity and corridors of peace. We will also be able to come together to prevent maritime crimes, preserve maritime ecology, protect against disasters, and prosper from true economy. Now, he further said that India's own engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, from the shores of Africa to that of America, will be inclusive. We will promote a democratic and rules-based international order in which all nations, small and large, thrive as equal and sovereign. Now, as far as the US is concerned, while there have been very many policies that they want, if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy published by the Department of Defense, it very clearly makes out that Indo-Pacific is a priority theater. It further states that US is a Pacific nation. We are linked to our Indo-Pacific neighbors through unbreakable bonds of shared history, culture, commerce, and values. We have an enduring commitment to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific in which all nations, large and small, are secure in their sovereignty and able to pursue economic growth consistent with accepted international rules, norms, and principles of fair competition. Now, the report further states that in keeping with the US national security and defense strategies, Indo-Pacific is very critical for their continued stability, security, and it also talks of various challenges faced in the Indo-Pacific, and very clearly say that it cannot be tackled by a single country, however large and powerful it is. And one reason for it, if I may amplify, is the very nature of maritime domain. The threats emerging in one sector can just move very frequently because there are no walls, there are no boundaries. While there are maritime boundaries, but there are no physical boundaries. So the threats can actually move. And when we talk of conventional threats, it's actually war between two nations, which did not happen directly at sea for a long time. But the non-conventional threats are a big challenge to everybody who's got the sea. These are called also low-intensity maritime operations. It includes aspects like terrorism, drugs and arms trafficking, piracy, human trafficking, and unregulated illegal fishing. And then there are also threats to your economic and to the environment. Now, the report actually envisages structures that allow militaries of various nations to work together, leveraging each other's capabilities and to fight and win together. Now, it is very specific about Indo-U.S. relationship with one of the broad-based strategic partnership underpinned by common shared interests, democratic values, and strong people-to-people ties. It further states that the partnership has strengthened significantly over the last two decades, and it's deepening to build a new partnership beyond Indo-Pacific. Now, part of these were all the designation of India in June 2016 as a major defense partner, and the establishment of the U.S.-India 2+2 initiative dialogue in 2000, in the September of 2018. These are all steps that have gone in. Now, at this juncture, let me add that there are slightly differing perceptions of Indo-Pacific. While India looks at it as from the shores of Africa to that of America, U.S. views it as a stretch of the globe from the west coast of the United States to the western shores of India. However, both India and U.S. share a very common vision for open rules-based Indo-Pacific, where all nations thrive as equals. Now, we spoke about the vision expressed by Prime Minister Modi. Now, a similar vision was expressed by Prime Minister Joe Biden at the Quad Leaders Summit in September 2021, where he said, "Future of each of our nations and indeed the world depends on a free and open Indo-Pacific, enduring and flourishing in the decades ahead." Now, needless to say that all these shared interests and security cooperation between India and US expanded. We have had a number of initiatives to strengthen interoperability, stronger foundations for defense trade, technology sharing, and then we signed the communication compatibility and security agreement in 2018. Now, this is a very major military relationship, facilitating greater real-time data information, and that both the Department of Defense and the Indian Ministry of Defense is also looking at increasing the scope, complexity, and frequency of military exercises. Now, apart from maritime security, one of the facts that looking at is maritime domain awareness and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Now, while examining various facets of Indo-Pacific, the previous mentioned, most of the security angle, what emerges is the rise of China. Now you can see China has started moving in the Indian region for the last 2-3 decades now. And with a vast economic interest in the Indian Ocean region, the PLA Navy has been making regular forays into the Indian Ocean region. It's been very actively engaging. Now, you look at all the initiative, one road, one belt and road, you can call it by whatever name. Basically, they're trying to establish linkages and bases all along from Africa to Middle East to South Asia. So China is trying to establish it as a major part of the Indian Ocean region. And I would like to say it's a very potent threat in the years ahead. Now, as far as the Pacific is concerned, now look at China's own territorial claims, the seas close to its shores, most specifically the South China Sea, where she claims actually historic ownership over the entire region. And what they have been doing is what's called salami slicing, in the term, gradually bringing very small changes, which may be ignored, but over a period taken as a sum, it can change the entire complexion of the land and things like that. Now, in East China, they have had disputes over the Senkaku Islands. Basically, the area is estimated to have about 100 billion barrels of crude oil and about 7 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. So, if that area becomes your economic zone, can you imagine how much kind of money you can? It's also hoping that control of these islands will give them a direct, uncontrolled access to Pacific between the Japanese mainland chain and the Japanese island chain and Taiwan. Now, soon after the People's Republic of China was founded, they started looking at it. They talked of nearly 2 million square kilometers, Paracel Island, Scarborough, Stratford. Once again, we all know a big depository of natural gas and petroleum reserve other than rich fishing resources. Now you can see the rival claims around the islands, while China claims to be her territory and the territorial claims of Philippines, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei. Now, over a time, what they call the 9-10, they actually try to expand to the complete area, trying to get control of it, creating artificial islands and so on. Now, incidentally, most of these claims of China were rejected by an international arbitration tribunal under the UNCLOS treaty. But China says UNCLOS is not applicable because these are territorial disputes we bilaterally settle. So it is a very much threat not only in the Indian Ocean region, but also in South China Sea. Now the Indo-Pacific strategy report, which I spoke about earlier, of the United States Department of Defense, also holds a similar view and says, and I quote, People's Republic of China under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party seeks to reorder the region to its its advantage by liberating military modernization, influence operation, and predatory economics to coerce other nations. Now, they are very clear that they will not accept policies or actions that threaten our international rule-based order. Now, this again brought out in the recent 2+2 dialogue when Secretary of Defense Austin actually pointed out that the challenge of China seeking to refashion the region and international system deserves, we need to look at, and it's only doing to serve its own authoritarian interests. Let me now talk about Quad, or the Quadland Security Law. Again mentioned by the previous speaker. It's, as you can see, 4 democratic nations virtually on 4 corners of the Indo-Pacific. Like we mentioned, they actually started post the tsunami of 2004. They met together for humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. In 2007, they met again in the sidelines of Asian Regional Forum, again at the initiative of the Japanese Prime Minister then. While it was talked of developing a free and open Indo-Pacific, for some reason or other, it was on a slow track till it was revived again around 2017 and started calling it Quad 2.0 to develop a collective vision for free and open area. And this is what the Quad looks like with 4 countries. Focus has been on connectivity, sustainable development, counter-terrorism, maritime security, promote peace, stability, and prosperity. And well, China has always been raising concerns about that Quad is conceived about it, but all the 4 countries are very clear that it is not against any particular country. Now, let me come to the exercise Malabar, which is actually coming well before Quad, but because the countries involved are similar, it actually sort of got clubbed. It started in 1992 as a bilateral exercise between Indian-U.S. navies. Japan joined, later Australia joined, and one particular year when Singapore was part of the exercise. Now, China always raised concerns about Quad, that saying that Quad and Malabar are against it. So there was a drop in some of the members for some time. Australia was not part of it for a while. And then Japan became a regular from 2015. Now, the 25th edition of the exercise was held last year. We had it in 2 phases. The first phase was on the Philippine Sea, and then later we had it on the Bay of Bengal. Now, the joint military exercise, actually like Malabar, has got the potential to send a deterrent message. You don't have to be against anybody, but you know the forces are operating in the area, and therefore they will not tolerate any breaking of international norms. Now, in keeping with this vision of working together, what India went ahead in 2019 at the East Asia Summit and proposed a Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, basically to manage, conserve, and sustain the maritime domain. Essentially, it's a partnership of like-minded countries across from eastern shores of Africa to Western Pacific Ocean. And basically, it's a non-treaty-based, cooperative, collaborative approach. It's got 7 pillars which cover the entire gamut of maritime security, ecology, maritime resources, capacity building and resource sharing, disaster risk reduction management, science, technology, and academic cooperation, and trade and connectivity and maritime transport. Now, the common vision that we talked about between India and US for a free and open Indo-Pacific, you could see that the IPOI covers virtually everything. Now, the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States, which came out, I think it's signed by the White House, came out in 2022, talks of continuing to build strategic partnership in which US and India work together through regional groupings to promote stability in South Asia, collaborate in new domains such as health, space, and cyberspace, deepen our economic and technology cooperation, and contribute to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, it specifically says that we will strengthen Quad as a premier regional grouping and ensure that it delivers on issues that matters in the area. And it's hoping that driving force of Quad and other regional fora as an engine for growth and development across the Indo-Pacific. the report envisages the Quad to play a major role in building green shipping network and members to cooperate and provide standards. And in fact, the Quad is actually launching Quad Fellowship. The first batch of 100 students from all 4 countries will be encouraged to pursue graduate studies in STEM field, science, technology, engineering, mathematics in the United States from 2023. So actually, if you see, Quad has got potential to uplift the entire maritime sector in the region. And we recently had the 4th annual US-India 2+2 dialogue just a few days ago. So they further reaffirmed the shared commitment between both nations on many issues of growing strategic interest. They actually again set up regional stability, prosperity, inclusive regional architecture, and reiterate the importance of adherence to international law and challenges to rule-based order, including in South China Sea. Now, the ministerial dialogue also discussed the need to empower Quad and they had the whole gamut of issues needing to build defense partnerships, effective advances in technology. And here I would say not only defense, but also the maritime area of 4 IR technologies are coming in a big way in the commercial maritime field, which can help all the people here. And so they actually acknowledge that the navies are a driving force in advancing US and Indian shared interests, and they discuss the aspect of the PECA Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. There are also emerging opportunities and the logistics exchange memorandum of understanding, talked of regular bilateral and multilateral exercises, and more importantly, when the US ships are deployed in this area, use of the Indian shipyards for their repair and maintenance. This is all big things that we go, and also they also said that China has reached seeking to refashion the region, but therefore it's up to all the others involved to ensure that the international order is maintained. Now, let me say that while a number of initiatives of the annual maritime force is the focus, the cooperation between India and US. So it's not only our navies or maritime forces, be it the navies or coast guards or cooperation between all the other little nations. You could have things like port visits. Here we see the Japanese coast guard ship coming up, which can actually help in search and rescue, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, operational interaction, staff talks, training, and high-level visits and strategic interaction. All this can help in increased cooperation across Asia Pacific. And India and US should actually take the lead in encouraging and coordinating such activities. Among these are, things like mission-based deployment, the furthest corners of both oceans, and humanitarian assistance is a very major thing that can happen. And one of the other issues that we also talked of is enhancing the maritime domain awareness. Now, this is where the previous one of the speakers was talking drones, etc. If you're talking of unmanned aircraft here, the UAVs, etc., you can monitor the area. Now, this is just a pictorial depiction of the kind of information that comes from across various sources to develop your picture, both on the surface and underwater. Now, India took some initiative in this by setting up a information fusion center at Gurugram near Delhi. Now, it's already got linkages with 21 partner countries, and 5 of them, including the US, have got liaison officers there, and there are 22 multinational agencies cooperating across. Now, that gives you a picture of the entire Asia. Now, let me sum up by saying that the concept of India Pacific is becoming more relevant with each passing day. And cooperation between US and India will matter a lot in this. Like I mentioned, the seamless nature of maritime domain only calls for cooperative security, and no nation can do it alone. Apart from Quad nations, the ASEAN and even nations of the European Union have started showing interest in the concept of Indo-Pacific. Now, areas of cooperation identified by India and US, many of which overlap the proposed IPOI, needs to be progressed. And we have the 4 leaders of the 4 Quad countries virtually unison. And then that's why Quad could take the lead. And if you have a regular institutional interaction between maritime forces, the laterals to bilateral, multilateral seminars, and even think tanks contributing to such areas such as this will certainly bring us much closer understanding and so essential for tackling maritime security challenges. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for the thoughtful, insightful, and presentation of subject. Now I invite our final speaker for the session, Dr. Mohammed Hosni.
Thank you, Sharon. It's a great pleasure to be here at the CPPR. Pleasure made sweeter because the chair is a student of mine. I'd also like to thank Dr. Dhanuraj and Rajeshwari for inviting me here. But there can be no discussion of India-US relations today without a session on the Indo-Pacific. And I'm honored to be on this panel with Vikram Singh and Vice Admiral Mughlidhar. So I'll first try to answer some, we were given some leading questions, so I'll try to answer some of those questions. But then after that, I thought I would focus on some concerns and challenges that India has or I have around the Indo-Pacific before moving on to the, I'll probably skip some of the questions on science and technology. That's really not my strong suit. So the first question is was that we were given was on emerging technologies in the defense sector. Now, many years ago, when I started out as a young researcher at the Observer Research Foundation, I co-authored a piece on India-US defense relations and edited a monograph on trends in India-US defense trade based on a conference. I remember thinking at that point that, you know, some of the challenges that we faced in defense trade seemed insurmountable, but clearly much water has flowed down the river since then. And I think one of the major disagreements was over the foundational agreements. But since then, we have finalized 2 of the last 4 foundational enabling agreements, which allow for sharing of high-end capabilities, equipment, and intelligence. And at that point, it looked very, very difficult that we eventually get to sign these agreements. So defense trade since then has really increased by leaps and bounds. We are now a major defense partner of the United States. We get advanced technology cooperation, which enables technology cooperation with the United States. Defense trade has now closed $21 billion, including cutting-edge P-81 anti-submarine warfare aircraft and MH-60R naval helicopter. And we are engaged through several dialogues like the 2+2. And our defense cooperation has reached new heights by looking at opportunities for joint defense production, like the agreement for developing an air-launched unmanned aerial vehicle under the DGTI, which Vikram helped to set up apparently. So we have certainly benefited from US intelligence, particularly the satellite pictures during the skirmishes with the Chinese in the last couple of years. So the next natural frontier in Indo-US defense cooperation would be on countering emerging technologies. So emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, cyber warfare, all have security dimensions. And this is where the next round of competition among the major powers will be. So the major powers will be competing to deploy and to develop these technologies to shape the economic and military balance to their advantage. And history has shown us that countries which have technological superiority, particularly in the military realm, will have an edge over those which do not. And the history of colonization bears witness to this. So the US has used its technological superiority to underwrite its own dominance in global politics and strengthen its national security And it does continue to have this edge. But as a recent CRS report points out, the Chinese and the Russians are making steady progress in developing these advanced military technologies. And once these technologies are integrated into their militaries and deployed, they could have significant implications for the future of international security and the international order. And there is one thing that both the United States and India want, it is that we do not want Chinese hegemony. And the Chinese have developed various types of air, land, and sea, undersea autonomous military vehicles. And it is actively pursuing swarm technologies, which could be used to overwhelm adversary missile interceptors. Moreover, it is developing a suite of AI tools for cyber operations, according to this CRS report. So we obviously need to work together to counter this. And I believe India is already in the process of procuring predator armed drones, 10 for each one of the services from the United States, to deal with China's use of UAVs along the India-China border. So there's certainly been some movement on this at the official level talks as well. At the first ever in-person leaders summit of the Quad last year, the leaders had launched a statement on principles of technology, along with new efforts which will advance critical and emerging technology shaped by our shared democratic values and respect for universal human rights. And this is being discussed at the bilateral level as well. President Biden has expressed his desire to develop strong partnership with allies like India in critical and emerging technologies. In 2020, the MEA announced the establishment of the NEST division, which will engage in technology diplomacy and deal with foreign policy and international legal aspects of the critical and emerging technologies. In 2021, the United States and India launched the US-India Artificial Intelligence Initiative to scale up science and technology cooperation. We also joined the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence as founding members. So one way I think that the United States and India could cooperate in countering emerging technologies or developing emerging technologies would be to have a trilateral arrangement with Israel, because both the United States and India and Israel are suppliers of military equipment to India. And what India could bring to the table more than capital really would be engineers and research. And we are already emerging as a powerhouse with new technologies. And a number of US tech companies have made huge investments in India. And one of my friends, Samir Patil, argued that bringing in this kind of trilateral cooperation would bring the three innovation hubs of Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, and Bengaluru together to capitalize on their respective strengths and declared national technology priorities. And this will offer benefits like having robust and tested edge in emerging technologies to all three militaries over the adversaries, help to develop interoperability and reinforce their access to the Indian market. And this could actually eventually build into India's own Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliance initiative, and then enable it to build its own defense manufacturing base, without which I am convinced that India will never emerge as a great power. More importantly, I think New Delhi and Washington really need to work together politically on setting standards for responsible use of such emerging technologies, particularly lethal autonomous weapon systems, in accordance with international law, and develop a governance framework and a verification regime for this. But the most obvious challenge to future bilateral trade defense cooperation is the fear of US sanctions against India under CATSA, which kind of hangs like a sort of Damocles over our heads. Before addressing the second question about the Quad, I want to mention a few concerns and challenges that India faces about the Indo-Pacific. I think the biggest challenge is the lack of definitional clarity or definitional consensus about what the Indo-Pacific actually is, and this is something that Vice Admiral Muralidharan had mentioned in his presentation. There are different interpretations in different countries about what Indo-Pacific stands for. Prime Minister Modi says it stretches from the shores of Africa to the Americas. And from this definition, it's quite clear that India sees the Indo-Pacific as a theater which encompasses East Asia as well as the Middle East. So the waters towards the west, the Western Indian Ocean, are of equal importance for India, because we get over 70% of our oil and gas supply from the Middle East, and because we have a 7 million strong diaspora in the region. Again, China is also almost as dependent on the Middle East for its energy supplies, and it has strong relations with the countries in the Middle East. And this is why the Indian Navy's maritime security strategy focused on the Western Indian Ocean. For the United States, however, it seems that the Western Indian Ocean is not as important to its conception of the Indo-Pacific. And despite many assurance, and there have been many assurance from the United States, the Middle East still does not come within the purview of the US's conception of the Indo-Pacific. And why do I say this? Because the Middle East still comes under the CENTCOM and not under the Indo-Pacific Command. Perhaps this is a legacy issue because many of these countries were part of CENTCOM. But this could be a problem because the Middle East is where the United States and India have had the most differences, whether it is US action in Libya or Syria or the differences with Iran, a country which is crucial to India. If the United States, again, if the United States decides to withdraw from the rest of the world, to go back to isolationism, India is naturally worried about how much of a burden it will have to shoulder. It's also uncertain if the United States has the will, resources, or the strength to prop up an India-centric security framework in the region. So we need to get to a definitional agreement on the Indo-Pacific, though of course the lack of agreement should not stop us from cooperation. The second challenge is that all four countries do not have identical levels of strategic awareness or military capabilities in the Indian Ocean. So we need to develop habits of cooperation and coordinate and start to jointly adopt policies and strategies. The third challenge again is related to China. Most of India's close partners in its Indo-Pacific strategy, whether it is the members of the Quad or the Indian Ocean regions or ASEAN, they all have much stronger relations, economic relations with China than with India. This could turn out to be a problem, particularly if China decides to use hardball, use economic coercion. And the example of how the Quad frittered out in 2008 after Australia under Kevin Rudd is quite fresh in our minds. So there is this possibility of cooperation on the Indo-Pacific being held hostage to domestic politics in these countries and to China's own concerns. The fourth challenge is of India's own capability. It is not certain how much India will be able to invest in developing its naval power and in its economic partners, given the economic situation in India, where there is a lot of competing pressures on the budget. And some economists are predicting some hard times ahead for India. It's also not certain whether Japan and Australia will be interested in investing military and economic power to support India in that kind of situation. The fifth challenge would be to convince partners in the Indo-Pacific that India is sufficiently invested in the region and is there for the long haul. And this has become a little difficult because India chose not to join the RCEP. And while there were domestic reasons for not joining the RCEP, it would be interesting to see if this will affect the way the region views India's credibility, and it will damage India's economy in the long run, as it could make India uncompetitive and close it out of the Asian markets. And an economically weak India, of course, is not going to be of any use to either or interest to any of its partners. Finally, overemphasizing the Indo-Pacific, I think, runs the risk of antagonizing China, since it sees the Indo-Pacific essentially as a strategy to contain it. And while the United States and Australia are physically distant from China, India, Japan, and other country partners which are close to China need to be much more nuanced in their pronouncements about the Indo-Pacific. And while it is true that modern technology has made distance a non-factor in war, geography still matters, particularly since both Japan and India share borders with China. And I think the United States needs to understand this dilemma that India faces. Moving on to the question about the Quad, certainly a key part of the engagement today is the Quad. The problem with the Quad is that despite the decidedly increasingly intense nature of engagement and despite several meetings, there still seems to be a lack of trust among the members. And the announcement of the AUKUS alliance certainly begs the question of the need for such an alliance when the Quad is already in place. The AUKUS makes Australia only the second nation after the UK with which the United States is willing to share its nuclear submarine technology. And we get that from the Russians, or we have gotten that from the Russians on lease, not from the United States. What is it that the AUKUS has that the Quad does not? Perhaps the answer is simple in that the Quad has India, which is not a treaty ally of the United States, while all the members of the AUKUS are certainly treaty allies. But is there a preference for an Anglo-Saxon alliance here? Or does the United States not trust India or even France enough? These are some questions which, I think the Indian elite has been discussing. There is also concern that the AUKUS could lead to a crowding of nuclear attack submarines in the Eastern Indian Ocean, eroding India's own regional preeminence. And I do agree that the United States does have good reasons not to trust India implicitly. I know the Russian invasion of Ukraine and India's subsequent response to it have made it quite clear that India will not act like an American United States and follow its lead with docility. But as far as India is concerned, there are two views about how the Ukraine issue could affect the US role in the Indo-Pacific. One is, of course, that the United States will be distracted by the security situation in Europe. It will be too distracted to focus on the Indo-Pacific. And it certainly has the liberty not to focus on the Indo-Pacific because it is not geographically in the Indo-Pacific. The other view is that with countries like Germany now planning to remilitarize and increase their defense spending, the United States will now be able to finally give due attention to the Indo-Pacific. At this point, I think any of these scenarios are plausible. So let's see where we are a couple of years from now and see. So my answer to the question of whether the Quad can play a role is that yes, it can, and in building interoperability. But first, we need to overcome this lack of trust and perhaps also get the Southeast Asian countries to accept it. The third question we were asked was, what role does joint military exercises have in countering emerging threats in the Pacific? Well, increased military exercises have greatly enhanced interoperability and camaraderie, particularly after the signing of the foundation agreements. And India, of course, engages in more military exercises with the United States than with any other country. So exponentially growing US-India bilateral as well as multilateral maritime exercises will be vital to the stability and security in the region sea lanes. So yes, joint military exercises certainly play a significant role in countering emerging threats in the maritime domain of the Indo-Pacific. I'll skip the last question because that is not really something that I'm an expert on. Since this conference is on Indo-U.S. relations, I want to end by saying that, what really baffles me about the relations between India and the United States is that we have a very, very robust bilateral relationship, whether it's cooperation on health, cybersecurity, agriculture, counterterrorism, trade, name any area, and the United States and India have a dialogue going on that particular area. But it's at the multilateral fora that we never seem to agree. The latest example being Ukraine. And perhaps this is because of our very differing positions within the international order. One is an established superpower and the other is an aspiring great power. So there will be many issues on which we do not agree. But these should not be allowed to cloud over the relationship, as there are far more issues on which we do agree. India is what it is, noisy, argumentative, with a mind of its own, though what Sumit Ganguly once referred to as reflexive anti-Americanism is no longer there, but we will continue to argue with you. We will not be like other partners of the United States and be very docile and compliant. So like in all democracies, I think the space for dissent between these two strategic partners should be preserved and respected. But we do see the big picture as does the United States, I wish, and that is what we must really build on. I'll end on that pious hope. Thank you.
We had a very insightful session. I would like to pose the first question to Mr. President. He recently talked about God as an alliance that would protect the U.S. bilateral relations also, one of the bilateral fora. I was wondering whether it would have another dimension that may not be as increasingly talked about, like
that developing as a trade forum and developing into a free trade agreement of sorts? And how much is that a possibility or an alternative?
Well, thank you, and thank you for hosting us and moderating this great discussion. The Quad is kind of trying to be anything but an alliance. So, and it is almost, it's like I think it does protest too much that it is not a security alliance, right? It's focused on all of these affirmative areas of cooperation. So, and this is largely, I think, India's preference. It's India setting the terms. It's one of the reasons things like AUKUS happen, because the Quad is affirmatively not trying to say we're not a security alliance, while everyone is saying it's all about China, but it never mentions China, right? I think that has a lot of utility. The Quad can actually facilitate meaningful cooperation in a whole bunch of areas that didn't have coordination among these big powers in Asia, even though each was very involved. So take supply chain security or critical minerals.
gives us a ray of hope for the Indo-U.S. relations, and that is just a continuation of the already thriving relations on various counts and in different areas. To summarize the main takeaways of the conference, I would like to start with the introductory session yesterday. Ms. Judith Brown, Consul General of U.S. in Chennai, when speaking of shared values of India and the United States, the world's largest and two of the oldest democracies, stressed upon the need for deeper participation among the governments, administration, and the people through global strategic comprehensive partnerships, which have become now imperative for peace and security in the current times. Mr. Sujit Kumar, Rajya Sabha Member of Parliament, agreed with Ms. Raj's thoughts and also emphasized on the Indian diaspora being a very important public diplomacy tool and how India will leverage our relations in this domain. The relations of these two countries can be one of the most defining partnerships in the 21st century, as noted by Mr. Sujit Kumar. The conversation between Dr. Michael Kugelman and Ambassador P.V. Srinivasan, moderated by Ms. Anne Sheshadri, brought out the importance of strategic relations between India and the United States, especially in the context of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Dr. Kugelman highlighted how Russia cannot be looked upon as a reliable partner, but Ambassador Srinivasan provided the rationale for how the Indo-Russian relations need not be an impediment to our relations with the United States. And India is supporting the humanitarian aid in Ukraine. Discussing the opportunities in the recent two-plus dialogue, Dr. Kugelman also spoke of the multifaceted level of cooperation between the two countries and elaborated how the Ukraine issue does not prove to be an impediment and will continue, and Indo and U.S. relations will continue to thrive despite many of these roadblocks. The first session on building synergy in the global platform between India and the U.S., we have three panelists, Professor G. Gopakumar, Mr. Aditya Ramanathan, and Dr. Harinda Sekho, who joined us virtually. Professor Bruce CA chaired the discussion, and some of the main points of the session were the importance of civil society organizations, a strong diaspora presence, and how these can be leveraged and harnessed to build capacity as well as technology. The session also highlighted that the relations between the countries are balanced and nuanced. We can evolve the strategy of harnessing our civil society to build a domestic and foreign policy. The bridge to self-reliance for India can be brought out by our technically trained youth. The areas of cooperation were also highlighted, some of the common interests between the two countries, which were immense, as stressed upon by the speakers, including technology development, semiconductors, supply chain resilience, etc., where the skilled youth can be encouraged to harness effective diplomacy. And similarly, academia and think tank business communities have immense potential to bring out opportunities for the people-to-people contact. The second session brought up convergence and challenges in clean energy and climate change by Dr. Vibhuti Bhushan Karnai and Dr. Dhanashri Jaya. The session was chaired by Dr. Anu Pune, who set the context of the discussion by citing data on emissions by both countries and the need for commitment on various areas of climate crisis. The speakers brought out pertinent points on the Indo-U.S. commitments regarding investing in clean energy and renewable energy, which need to be emphasized. It was also highlighted that the economic impact of climate change is huge for both the countries, including the loss of tourism, environmental damage, loss of production, etc. The U.S. and India clean energy partnerships, achievements, as well as challenges were brought forth, and knowledge sharing was emphasized as the most important area of cooperation. One of the examples quoted was of subnational cooperation between the U.S. Colorado and the Indian Gujarat of diversifying and deepening renewable energy cooperation. Both the countries need to overcome some challenges together, including the technology gap, the innovation gap, as well as the political will. The session closed with remarks from the chair on immediate solutions which were needed, such as investing in the climate literacy of the people, decentralizing the implementing of the climate change action plan, as well as allocating more funds to the local governments for doing the same. Today's session in the morning started with trade connectivity and economic cooperation and a very interesting presentation by Mr. R.P. Pradhan and Mr. Kapil Paul. The session was chaired by Mr. Deepak L. Aswani. The session opened with remarks from Mr. Dustin Wiggle, Economic Officer at the U.S. in Chennai, who stressed upon the growing momentum in bilateral ties of the U.S. and India in areas of renewable energy, agriculture, healthcare, etc., which again are very important paradigms for our relation as well as cooperation. The chair, Mr. Aswani, in his opening remarks, said that the relation between the two countries should focus on financial and economic relations as well, with the highways, waterways, railways, infrastructure progressing in the country. It would definitely help in progressing the trade as well. The speakers stressed on the continuity of relations, which they hope would lead to transformation. Examples and statistics of how India needs to stand alone and be efficient with the resources it has were also presented. The session also brought out an important focus from yesterday on the ease of conserving the energy, ecology, as well as the environment. To quote Dr. Pradhan, trade must move beyond borders, otherwise the soldiers will lose. The last session today on the U.S. and India in the Indo-Pacific, including maritime trade, emerging technology, and security, had three panelists: Mr. Vikram J. Singh, Vice Admiral N.P. Muralidharan, and Dr. Umar Pradhan. I'm sorry, Dr. Umar. The session chair, Ms. Sharon Sujan Koshi, opened the session by showcasing the importance of the Indo-Pacific region in the Indo-U.S. relations. The speakers highlighted varied aspects of the Indo-Pacific where the U.S. and India can cooperate, as well as those cooperations can be further harnessed. The areas of common interest of the two countries were the geopolitical, including the war, joint military exercises, trade, climate and health partnerships, clean energy partnerships, biotechnology, etc. Some of the non-conventional threats were also brought forth, which were mostly focused on the countries which are connected by sea, such as terrorism, human trafficking, economic challenges, as well as environmental challenges. It was mentioned by some of our guests yesterday and today that mediation and diplomacy talk of cooperation and engagement need to be brought out to closed doors and spoken about in academic gatherings and in think tank circles. So thank you all for doing that over yesterday as well as today. After providing a very short glimpse into the two-day rigorous deliberations, I would now like to offer our appreciation and gratitude to the people who made this in-person conference after 2 years of pandemic a success. Just as we were getting very comfortable and adept at unmuting ourselves and presenting slides, navigating devices over multiple sessions, different platforms, we are extremely grateful to all of you who come here and join us in person, who accepted our invitations, and thank you very much for that. We apologize for the technical glitches yesterday, and I hope that you enjoyed today's session. I would like to begin by thanking Mr. Taranjit Singh Sandhu, the Indian Ambassador to the U.S., along with the officials at the Indian Embassy in Washington, especially Mr. Abu Rahman and Ms. Tuja Menon, and also to our advisor, Ambassador T.P. Srinivasan, for helping the speakers with the visa processing so that they could join us in time for the conference. Special thank you to the Coordination Division of the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi for their timely assistance and in expediting the visas for us. CPTR is ever grateful to the United States Consul General Chief in Chennai, especially to Ms. Judith Ravan, Consul General of the U.S. in Chennai, Ms. Ansha Shadri, Ms. Chitra, and Mr. Vijay Kumar, who are here with us for supporting this conference and the project on the Indo-U.S. relations, which also included 4 webinars which preceded this conference and was hosted at CPTR. Thank you for the faith and the confidence that you have shown to CPTR over the years We are immensely grateful to all the speakers and delegates of the conference for spending time with us, giving us a glimpse into the research, their academic work, their industry and business knowledge that enriched our awareness and understanding in all the themes under discussion. Thank you, Dr. Michael Kubelman and Mr. Vikram Singh, especially for traveling from the US to Kochi for this conference. We would also like to thank our guests and registered participants who spent time with us, shared their thoughts through questions and comments, and we hope that we continue to support CPR activities. Our advisors and senior fellows have always been a source of constant encouragement for our work, while also asking us very hard questions and pushing us to do our best in exploring new areas of research and encouragement. Thank you to you all as well. CPR would like to place on record our appreciation and thanks to Mr. Rick Grosso, Barani Chair in U.S. India Policy Studies, the Center for Strategic and International Relations, and Mr. Willem Leshner, Director and Senior Fellow at the South Asian Program, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, for suggesting and introducing us to the speakers for the conference and for also helping in conceptualizing the session for this two-day celebration. A big thank you to our media friends who came on our invitation and covered the event. We often overlook the people who are closest to us and sometimes take them for granted. But I would like to appreciate and thank the team at CPR who have tirelessly coordinated and worked to make not only this conference but the project over this whole year a big success. I would like to call upon my team, Simi, Arvind, Raju sir, Ashish, Prashant, Akanksha, Angela, Anu Maria Francis, Anu Anna Jo, Rajeshri Praveen, Sharon Sutankoshi, our interns, Adyasha, Arun, Ashwati, Meghna, Shivya, and Tom. And special mention to our board of trustees for mentoring and supporting us in all of our activities. Thank you very much to all of you. Before I close, a few logistics announcements, please. The guests who have not checked out, kindly do so before lunch. We will also assemble for 2 photographs just before heading for lunch. We would like the speakers and the guests in 1 photograph, and the speakers as well as the team of CPR in other photographs. So kindly please allow us